Hello everyone, welcome to my History 197 seminar presentation. Let's start off with a question. What images of World War II stand out to you the most? To me, it's the propaganda poster. With its striking visuals and memorable slogans, the poster became an important piece of communication in the United States during the war. I argue that the propaganda posters produced during World War II were advertisements that spurred Americans to rally together in a unified effort to win the war, and I identified three major themes after observing these posters: patriotism, social responsibility, and labor and management relations. So let's get started. During my research, I used multiple sources like books, academic journals, and primary sources. The academic journals and primary sources helped give me background information such as the labor movement and rationing, all of which helped form my arguments on the themes of propaganda posters. My most used source was a book called Design for Victory, World War II Posters on the American Home Front by William L. Burr Jr. and Harry R. Rubenstein. It helped introduce me to the topic of propaganda posters, provided many of the images themselves, and provided solid evidence for my arguments. After my research, I started asking, what were the goals of these posters? What did they want their target audience to know? Were there any secondary messages? And how was management and labor using these posters? Let's move on to answer these questions. Patriotism was not a new theme in propaganda posters, but I found out that they were a little different from previous designs. During World War I, posters felt more propagandistic, and they often made exaggerated claims about the Central Powers. According to my book, Posters in the George C. Marshall Research Foundation, post-war disillusionment meant more people had created a conscientiousness of propaganda, which included posters. In fact, Francis E. Brennan, the chief of the Office of War Information Graphics Division, or OWI, talked about how people's knowledge is greater, his background broader, and his taste stricter, and this was during World War II. There was an active effort by government agencies like the OWI and the Treasury Department to humanize and personalize propaganda posters while still using patriotism as a theme. For example, in this poster, "You Buy 'em, We'll Fly 'em," it depicts the face of a friendly pilot asking citizens to buy war bonds. It felt more personal and less manipulative, and as a result, it was seen as being more acceptable to people's tastes. In fact, posters that glorified individuals, like this one depicting President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, were not produced in order to avoid the charge that the Treasury was producing political propaganda. I found out in my book, Design for Victory, and my academic journal source, the U.S. Front, the Archetypal Opposition and Narrative Casting as Propaganda Strategies in World War II, that a conservative Congress actually defunded the OWI, suspicious that it was producing New Deal propaganda. As long as they avoided looking too propagandistic, artists could draw whatever patriotic image or flag they want on a poster. On to the next theme. What do I mean by social responsibility? In my definition, it means individuals, organizations, and companies have a civic duty to act in the best interests of their society. In this case, it was supporting the war effort. In the months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. government began rationing food and supplies and transformed its peacetime economy to one that was on a war footing. Take a look at one of my sources, a 1942 Life magazine with a section about sugar rationing. Because of all this, propaganda posters began encouraging citizens to do their part. For example, in this poster, it tells readers to save a few good tires for themselves while giving the rest to Uncle Sam. Not only is it telling Americans to contribute to the war effort, it's also encouraging them to keep a few spare tires for themselves. They didn't need to sacrifice everything. Just be prepared that cars and spare parts will not be available during the course of the war. Posters also told Americans to stay silent about important military information, like in this poster, where it explains how talk can spread easily to potential enemy spies. People's silence could mean life and death for so many soldiers, airmen, and seamen. The goal of this theme was to help reinforce to Americans that they had special responsibilities during this great conflict. They didn't need to sacrifice everything, but a few behavioral changes could help the war effort. Let's move on to the next theme.
He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago.
During the Great Depression, relations between management and labor were frosty, but the war demanded them to cooperate. The unions pledged to not strike, and business leaders converted their factories to meet demands of the war. As this process started, posters were released to encourage friendly relations between the two sides, some of which were produced by private companies. In 1942, General Motors, GM, released a series of posters called Keep 'em Firing. The most prominent of these was a poster that displays two fists with one labeled labor, the other management, as the above slogan proclaims, "Together we can do it." In a show of patriotic fervor, GM declared its commitment to the government's war effort hand in hand with its employees. The "Together we can do it" poster even showed both sides rolling up their sleeves, ready to get to work. However, even during such times, many of these posters were also produced to advance their own interests, the unions and the businesses, usually undercutting the other side. In the spring of 1942, the United Auto Workers, UAW, planned an advertisement campaign to take credit for wartime conversion before being outdone by GM in regards to advertisement. The Sheldon Clare Company of Chicago, for example, a private poster publisher, structured its World War II material not only to meet wartime demands, but to satisfy corporate sensibilities as well. Its celebration of capitalism reversed both management's poor image and labor's more positive image from the Great Depression. Despite their cooperation and some uniting posters, there were other propaganda posters that had secondary messages meant to advance the interests of either the businesses or the unions. When the war finally ended in 1945, old rivalries and tensions came back to the forefront. Moving on. Although patriotism, social responsibility, and the business-union relationship were some of the biggest themes in propaganda posters, there were other themes that posters covered, such as the Allies. They always focused on the unity and common shared values of these nations, but not all of the Allies were exactly friendly with the US, especially the Communist Soviet Union. The OWI and other government agencies produced posters like this one to humanize the US's former foe and show how the average Soviet soldier or citizen was no different from one in America, for example. However, like with the theme of patriotism, people could only tolerate a certain amount of propagandistic material. For example, although this is not a propaganda poster, but helps supports my point, according to the book Why America Fights, the movie Mission to Moscow was such a blatant whitewash of Joseph Stalin's USSR that critics of all political stripes criticized it. It goes to show that America's newly found conscientiousness of propagandistic material could only go so far. It is a fascinating topic to research, but I wanted my research project to focus more on the themes that directly affected people's lives on the home front. Now, on to the conclusion. Decades after World War II ended, the propaganda poster became a symbol of that great conflict. They used several themes, including appealing to Americans' patriotism and encouraging them to ration their supplies and stay silent about important war information. Along with this, the government got business and labor to unite and commit to the war effort. However, it didn't end their rivalries. Instead, as they rallied around the flag and called for people to sacrifice for the war, both management and labor produced their own papers that stressed their support and contributions while sidelighting the other one. And although the nature of our allies was an important theme in many propaganda advertisements, I believe that the three I selected were more important because they directly affected American people's lives. Posters were political instruments meant to arouse emotion, a sense of duty, and unity in the face of aggressive foreign powers. Thank you for listening.